Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
The Pakistani Prime Minister is in Beijing for an official visit, as this year marks 75 years of diplomatic ties between China and Pakistan. China's Shenzhou 23 astronauts entered the Tiangong space station, and the White House says the US and Iran have reached a preliminary understanding to end the war. Hello and welcome to World Today, a news program with a different perspective. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. Our first story. Chinese President Xi Jinping says China and Pakistan should accelerate the building of an even closer China-Pakistan community with a shared future in the new era, deliver more outcomes from their all-weather cooperation, and contribute to regional peace and stability. He made the remarks when meeting with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif in Beijing. President Xi says China stands ready to maintain high-level exchanges with Pakistan, strengthen strategic communication, and steer the bilateral relationship in the right direction. On his part, Prime Minister Sharif says Pakistan is ready to learn from China's governance experience, deepen cooperation under the Belt and Road Initiative, and advance the building of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Sharif is on a 4-day official visit to China, which began in the eastern city of Hangzhou. Sun Tianyuan has more about the trip.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's arrival in Beijing marks the second leg of his official visit to China. Earlier on Saturday, Prime Minister Shehbaz attended a business meeting in Hangzhou, focusing on information technology and also battery energy storage. He also visited the headquarters of Chinese tech giant Alibaba. China's foreign ministry has described the Pakistani leader's visit as an important high-level exchange as the two countries mark 75 years of formal diplomatic relations this year. The ministry said China-Pakistan relations have remained strong despite changes in international landscape over the decades. And it added that the two sides have maintained close, high-level engagement, expanded practical cooperation, and achieved great results through collaboration on the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. According to the ministry, the two countries have also maintained close communication and coordination on major international and regional issues, helping safeguard common interests and promote peace, stability, and development in the region. China says it hopes Prime Minister Shehbaz's visit will provide an opportunity for both sides to carry forward their traditional friendship, deepen cooperation across the board, and open a new chapter in building an even closer China-Pakistan community with a shared future in a new era.
That was Sun Tianyuan reporting. For more, we're joined by Sultan Hali, a retired Air Force officer and author in Pakistan. Thank you very much for joining us. First of all, reports say one of the focuses of the talks between Pakistani and Chinese leaders this time is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. It's been over a decade since the launching of the project. So what do you think is the role of CPEC in Pakistan's development?
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. And it's a very important question you have asked because please remember that CPEC has been pivotal in addressing Pakistan's chronic energy shortages, modernizing transport networks, and positioning the country as a hub in regional connectivity. It provided the infrastructure backbone that stabilized Pakistan's economy to a great extent and also attracted global attention to its geostrategic location.
Mm-hmm. Now, the two countries are working to build an upgraded CPEC 2.0. What do you think will be the key areas of cooperation under this CPEC 2?
Yeah, this is a question the world is also asking, and I'll be glad to respond. In my humble opinion, the upgraded phase will emphasize industrial cooperation, agricultural modernization, digital connectivity, and green energy. And beyond the roads and power plants, it will focus on creating jobs, boosting exports, and integrating Pakistan into global supply chains, which is an extremely important factor.
Then what kind of concrete projects do you expect under this CPEC 2?
Well, to start with, for Pakistan, please remember that CPEC 2 means inclusive growth and opportunities for its youth in technology and industry. And for China, obviously, it strengthens a trusted corridor linking South Asia, the Middle East, and beyond. And for both people, it promises prosperity through shared innovation and sustainable development. Please, my punchline here would be that CPEC lit Pakistan's homes which were in darkness, and CPEC 2.0 must light up Pakistan's future. So, in response to what projects? Well, all these projects, mainly industrial and economic, as well as bringing connectivity, they are the projects which are very important and need attention.
And what practical changes will this CPEC 2.0 bring to the two countries and especially their peoples?
Well, the people of Pakistan, they have been under a great stress of challenges, and most of these challenges were due to our, dwindling economy as well as political wranglings. But in amongst all these challenges, one country which stood by Pakistan was China, or I should say, is China, which is still standing strong with Pakistan. So the changes that Pakistan is already witnessing and is looking forward to under CPEC 2.0 are that its economy will stabilize, energy shortages will be addressed, and most importantly, its defense needs to protect itself, especially from some of its neighbors who have belligerent designs. So these are the things which Pakistan expects from China and is looking forward to.
Now, during Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's trip to Hangzhou, he attended a business meeting focusing on information technology and battery energy storage, and he also visited Alibaba. In your opinion, why did he make these stops, and what does this tell us about the future direction of China-Pakistan economic cooperation?
Well, again, it's very essential to address this particular question and this aspect which you have raised. Prime Minister Sharif's focus on IT, battery energy storage, and Alibaba, it signals Pakistan's intent to move beyond traditional infrastructure into the digital and green economy, something which China has not only pursued with success, but is propagating for the world to adopt. And Pakistan would love to benefit from it. And therefore, this particular visit and this emphasis reflects a strategic pivot. Pakistan wants Chinese expertise not just in bricks and mortars, but in technology, in e-commerce, and renewable energy, sectors that will define future competitiveness. And I would like to conclude this point on Pakistan's pivot to IT and green energy shows the partnership is evolving from roads to ideas.
From roads to ideas. Now, as Pakistan seeks to modernize its economy, how can Chinese technological expertise and investment help accelerate Pakistan's digital transformation and industrial upgrading?
Well, the world knows, and we in Pakistan are very clear in our minds that China's strength in artificial intelligence, fintech, e-commerce, and renewable technologies can accelerate Pakistan's digital leap. And investment in smart grids, cloud services, and industrial automation will help Pakistan modernize its economy, reduce inefficiencies, as well as create new avenues for employment and entrepreneurship.
Great. Just now you said that ideas are very important in China-Pakistan cooperation. Now, in China, there's a saying that you should not only give people the fishes, but also teach them how to fish. So what kind of cooperation do you think needs to be accomplished between China and Pakistan in order to improve Pakistan's ability to develop its own digital economy and artificial intelligence?
Well, I think you have already very succinctly put it into this old proverb, which you just repeated, that if you give a man fish to eat, he'll not starve for a day. And if you teach him how to fish, he will not starve for life. The ancient wisdom, which is adopted from its own, 5 to 7,000 years old traditions, and which it is practicing. So it is what Pakistan is looking forward to, achieving from China, learning from China, is that we must have a sound infrastructure which is going to take us into the field of technology, into artificial intelligence, into industrial independence, and most, you see, importantly, stand on our own feet and not be dependent upon the West, but look at friends from on our east, specifically China, which does not, insist on giving you information technology or any other technology with strings, but instead it likes to take you along, build you or build your entrepreneurship so that you are independent of any strings from any side or any hegemonic designs from the West.
Now, this year marks the 75th anniversary of diplomatic ties between China and Pakistan. So, looking back over the decades, what do you see as the most important foundations that have kept the relationship resilient despite major global changes?
Pakistan supported China's global outreach in the 1970s when the world had decided to ignore China, to ignore mainland China. They had given, recognition to the Republic of China, and China has never forgotten that. And it has remembered that Pakistan and China are steadfast friends, especially in their times of need. And that is why China stood by Pakistan during sanctions and crises and is continuing to do so and is continuing to do so steadfastly. Therefore, this mutual reliability across changing global orders is the bedrock of resilience.
Chinese officials say they hope this visit will open a new chapter in building an even closer China-Pakistan community with a shared future. So in practical terms, what could this new chapter look like over the years to come?
Well, practically, it means expanding health, education, and innovation. It envisions a partnership not only of governments but of societies where students, entrepreneurs, and cultural exchanges deepen the bond. The next chapter is about moving from connectivity to co-creation, ensuring the friendship remains future-proof. In a nutshell, trust and reciprocity, not transactions, have kept the friendship resilient for 75 years.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Sultan Hali, a retired Air Force officer and author in Pakistan. Coming up, China's Shenzhou 23 astronauts enter the Tiangong space station. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Hello, I'm Yin Liang, Kramer Chair Professor of Economics at Willamette University. In a rapidly changing world, staying informed has never been more important. World Today delivers sharp analysis, global perspectives, and the stories behind the headlines. It is your trusted source to understand what's shaping our world. World Today, bringing the world closer.
Welcome back. The 3 astronauts aboard China's Shenzhou 23 spaceship have entered the Tiangong space station and met with another astronaut trio, starting a new round of in-orbit crew handover. The new crew consists of mission commander Zhu Yangzhu, a flight engineer, Zhang Zhiyuan, a spacecraft pilot, and Li Jiaying, a payload specialist from Hong Kong. The 2 crews then took group pictures for the 8th space get-together in China's aerospace history. The China Manned Space Agency says they will conduct handover work aboard the space station. For more, joining us on the line is Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy with Beijing Normal University. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Zhang.
Hello.
First of all, could you please brief us about the missions of the Shenzhou 23 crew?
So this is really a routine tour of duty. So it's changeover. So they after 6 months, you have a new set of crews going into space station to ensure there is continuous human presence there. And they'll be doing mostly scientific experiments. There will be over 100 experiments. They'll also do spacewalks going onto the outside and install some experiments over there and retrieve some samples. So it's mainly lab work. And this is really a gradual process in which the scientific output is being ramped up. For example, at this time, with Shenzhou 23 crew in particular, the capsule they're going up with, it has increased the downgoing capabilities, which means when you have biological samples in particular, you want to bring them back down to Earth to be able to analyze them. And they rearrange the interior of the capsule so it can carry a lot more stuff back down. And then also there's going to be more sophisticated experiments in terms of structural modifications onto the space station. There's going to be a greenhouse monitor that'll be on the outside, so they will need to go out there, put that on its own platform. So you can see the sophistication of the experiments going up gradually. That's the highlight of this mission, really.
Over 100 experiments up there, quite a busy schedule. One of the notable features of the Shenzhou 23 mission is that one astronaut will carry out a 1-year in-orbit stay experiment. This will be the longest space mission ever undertaken by Chinese astronauts to date. So what is the importance and especially the necessity of this 1-year experiment?
So 1 year or just over 1 year is basically the record of humans staying in space, sometimes involuntarily, sometimes in the past in the US and Soviet Union. Some people get stranded there for extended period of time. But the reason why we want to do this deliberately is because you want to collect data on how human physiology and psychology reacts to prolonged state, sort of space exposure. So there was exposure to microgravity, to loneliness, and all that. And this is useful for constructing more robust life support systems that will support sort of deeper space explorations, for example, going to Mars.
And how challenging will that be? And what preparations have been made for this experiment?
It is quite challenging because when you're in space, so the human body is highly efficient in the sense that if you think you don't really need something, it gets rid of it, which means in zero gravity, in microgravity, you suffer bone mass loss. You don't need strong bones, and you don't need strong muscles, especially hard muscles. So you suffer muscle atrophy, and those have really bad effects on you if you stay there. And the effect don't accumulate linearly with time, so it can grow really fast. So you want that kind of first-hand data to be able to figure out how things work. Obviously, to prepare for that, you need really rigorous training, both on the ground and in space. You want to do resistance training to train your muscle. And also, they did something quite smart. They had this VR based sort of psychological relief system. So you basically can immerse virtually yourself into a Earth-like environment. And also, there's the issue that the satellite relay system is so good now. You can get real-time TV signals in the space station, and that's quite important. That keeps you in touch with what's going on the ground. The sense of isolation gets dramatically reduced when you can do that.
And how will missions to be completed by Shenzhou 23 contribute to the world's aerospace development?
So this particular sort of 1-year stay will add vital data points. So as I said earlier, there's only been like a couple more other examples, and so this is a very rare data, and this data is prepared data. There's a whole set of monitoring going on, so it's very clean, very good data. So that's very important to learn how humans can stay in space. And also the experiments carried out by Shenzhou 23 is largely focusing on learning how to stay in space robustly, sort of efficiently. There's going to be embryo experiments to learn how the life cycle of basically biology works, and also study how liver tissue behaves in space. So all of that is from a deeper level, learning how your body may react to the space environment. And also there's other things like studying the next generation of possible solar panels and all that. That will make staying in space much more efficient. So that serves two goals. One is you can go further out. You can go to places like Mars. Secondly, you can stay in low Earth orbit for more extended amount of time. This means you can launch fewer rockets, and that's vitally important if you want to turn low Earth orbit into an economic opportunity.
Now, China has made numerous upgrades to the Shenzhou 23 spaceship, including improvements on the porthole. How will this upgrade benefit the crew members?
That's in reaction to the space debris problem that the last capsule, the previous to last capsule had. There was a tiny little space debris hit the window. cause fracture. That could become dangerous. So this time they basically thicken the window. It's triple layer. So they made it as robust as possible, as realistic. So it's in terms of safety margins, that's an improvement.
Among the astronauts, Li Jiaying has made history as the first astronaut from China's Hong Kong Special Administrative Region to travel to space. How would you interpret the significance of that?
Right. So one thing I think is really worth noting is she didn't enjoy any sort of special arrangement. It's no special accommodation. She just went through the whole training process. So she's going to serve the whole rotation, the whole full 6 months, and she's going to be carrying the full workload. She'll be the payload specialist, and a lot of the 100 experiments will be on her shoulders. So it's not symbolic. So it's full integration. So Hong Kong is fully integrated into the National Space Program, not only in terms of astronauts, but also the instrument they provide. The greenhouse monitor I mentioned, that was made by Hong Kong University. And further afield, looking at lunar explorations, both Chang'e 7 and Chang'e 8 will have vital components. The things that you can't do without for the permanent lunar base, so they're being developed by Hong Kong universities. So they're not just like tagging along, trying to learn the ropes. They just jump into the deep end straight away. So they're now very capable.
Now, Zhang Zhiyuan and Li Jiaying come from the third and fourth batches of astronauts, and this is their first space flight mission. What does this tell us about China's training and cultivation and selection of astronauts?
So that just says the pipeline is quite mature and efficient. So basically, the fourth batch began selection. The astronaut Li from Hong Kong, it belongs to the fourth batch, and that began selection in 2022, and the training officially started in 2024. So that's just 2 years ago. So in a very short turnaround time, the astronauts are being trained and fully ready to carry on like 6 months long duration tasks. So you can see that the whole pipeline of training in the department of looking after the astronauts, it's been so streamlined and become highly efficient. And also the fact that you have a diverse background of astronauts means the selection process is also quite efficient and they're selecting people that can actually go through the whole training process without problems. So that's quite good, considering you have foreign sort of Pakistani astronauts would probably fly on an even shorter training schedule. So that's quite impressive that they've been able to do this.
Exactly. Thank you very much. That was Zhang Fan, Associate Professor of Astronomy with Beijing Normal University. More to come. The White House says the U.S. and Iran have reached a preliminary understanding to end the war. And Kevin Warsh takes the Fed's helm as inflation climbs and consumer sentiment dives. You're listening to World Today. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. We'll be back after a short break.
Hello, my name is Alessandro Golombiewski Teixeira. I'm a professor of public policy and management at Tsinghua University in Beijing. I am a great listener of The World Today. In my opinion, The World Today is one of the best China radio programs. In The World Today, we can get the best news and analysis in what is happening now in the world. So please come to join us.
You're listening to World Today with me, Do Hongyu, in Beijing. The White House says the U.S. and Iran have reached a preliminary understanding to end the war, though negotiations are still underway. Under the proposed framework, the U.S. would ease sanctions on Iran, while Tehran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and allow commercial shipping to resume. Iran's foreign ministry said on Monday that a framework has been reached, but an agreement with the U.S. is not imminent. The spokesperson said Iran is negotiating an end to the war and is not discussing nuclear issues. Now joining us on the line is Dr. Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Zhang.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, the White House says the U.S. and Iran have reached a preliminary understanding to end the war. How significant is this development?
Well, I think it's significant, and also it sends a lot of good signals and bring about good news, not only just for the region, but also for the world. So at least a preliminary memorandum of understanding would mark the closest the two sides have come to ending active hostilities since this round of conflict erupted. And also, I think it at least suggests that both sides see the benefits in avoiding a wider warfare. So for Iran, I think it's very obvious because it needs to ease its economic situation. And for Trump, it's a tangible win, at least according to what he said, and he's trying to ease domestic pressure from high energy prices. And I would say for the region of the Middle East in general, it offers immediate relief from a stalemate that has already brought instability and caused the big global energy supply shock in decades. However, we should note that it's only a framework, but not a final deal. So I think its significance lies more in opening a diplomatic window.
Under this proposed framework, the U.S. would ease sanctions on Iran, while Iran would reopen the Strait of Hormuz and allow commercial shipping to resume. How realistic does this arrangement sound to you?
Well, my observation is that it's realistic as a short-term deal, but still it's very difficult to sustain. And so far, there are still a lot of disagreements between the two sides. So based on the discourse of the two sides, it seems that a 60-day truce window with technical demining and phased implementation is feasible. However, now the problem is that if either side overplays its hand, then there could be new problems and uncertainties. For example, if, let's say, Iran insists on retaining operational control of the strait, or if the United States has repeatedly said the blockade stays until a signed deal, there could be problems. And I think the problem here is that due to the lack of mutual trust between the United States and Iran, currently both sides can fall into military confrontation. Therefore, I think the next key question here is who is going to take the first step and to make the concessions above all.
But now Iran stresses that an agreement is not imminent. What are the key gaps between the two sides that could still derail a final deal?
Right, like I said, currently I would say it just sends the signal that both sides have the strong intention to de-escalate the confrontation. But it doesn't mean that the problem has been solved. In fact, the core disputes are there. Several unresolved issues remain. For example, the exact scope and timing of the sanctions relief and release of frozen Iranian assets remain. So it's still very unclear about these issues. Iran wants a specified portion upfront, and also it asks for guarantees, whereas the United States cannot provide such guarantees. And as for the Lebanon issue, we know that Iran always insists on a broader regional de-escalation, whereas the Lebanon ceasefire has not been, so they cannot provide a final answer for that question. And also there's problem with the verification mechanism for Hormuz demining and neutral passage. Also, last but not least, the nuclear issue remains there because currently there is a disagreement. The United States always wants early commitments on highly enriched uranium disposal, whereas Iran insists that nuclear issue should be placed to the next phase. So I would say the fundamental differences between the two sides have not yet been bridged at this stage.
Then how might regional players, including countries in the Gulf as well as Israel, respond to a possible easing of tensions between Washington and Tehran?
Right. I think these countries could have very different positions. As for the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, etc., I think they cautiously support this kind of move and momentum because obviously they fear a wider war more than a limited détente. So right now, if they know that there is going to be a stable regional environment, of course, it's in the interest of all the Gulf countries because it means that at least they can export their oil safely, and they can get enough revenues for their state. And also it means that they can improve the economic situation. However, I think currently Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates will watch very closely and remain cautious as the confrontation with Iran has already escalated, and there could be further security risks in the future. And the United States military has not yet completely withdrawn from the neighborhood and vicinity of Iran, and that means that anything could happen. As for Israel, I think it's highly alarmed at this moment, because Israel sees any kind of deal that ignores the nuclear issue as dangerous. So I think it will likely lobby Washington hard to keep military options on the table.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Dr. Zhang Chuchu, Deputy Director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. Coming up, Kevin Warsh takes the Fed's helm as inflation climbs and consumer sentiment dives. This is World Today. We'll be back. Kevin Warsh has officially been sworn in as the new chair of the U.S. Federal Reserve, stepping into the role at a difficult moment for the American economy. Rising oil prices linked to the Middle East conflict are pushing inflation higher. Consumer sentiment has fallen to record lows, increasing pressure on the central bank. President Donald Trump said Warsh would have the full support of his administration and again called for lower interest rates. But Fed officials are increasingly debating whether rates may need to rise further to contain inflation. For more on this, my colleague Zhao Yang spoke with Yan Liang, professor of economics at Willamette University.
So, Yan, first, how significant is Kevin Warsh's appointment at this particular moment for the U.S. economy? Does Warsh represent continuity with the Federal Reserve under Jerome Powell, or a major shift?
Well, I think Warsh actually represents a significant different monetary policy philosophy than Jerome Powell. I think there are three main differences. One is that Powell has been using the Fed's balance sheets to tighten long-term interest rates and to really adjust the liquidity that they want to provide to the economy. So right now, the Fed's balance sheets is about $6.7 trillion, which is 8 times more than back in 2007. So I think for Kevin Warsh, he mentioned about shrinking the balance sheets. He thinks this is going to be helpful to shrink the Fed's footprint in the financial markets. The second main difference is that Powell really relied heavily on the so-called forward guidance. In other words, he wants to give the public and the markets clue about future policy decisions, not to sort of shock the market, and also allow market to adjust to pivot onto the policy path to achieve the policy outcomes. But Warsh opposes this kind of communication style, and it basically argues that the kind of so-called forward guidance forces the market to anticipate the moves that can actually politicize the Fed. And the last difference, I think, is that Powell is very heavily dependent on incoming economic data. He's very so-called data-driven in terms of policy making. But Warsh has talked about so-called regime change in how the Fed should look at inflation. He believes that there should be more longer-term strategic framework instead of the immediate data-dependent kind of policymaking. So I think it does seem that the Warsh administration is going to make certain difference in terms of policymaking, but it still remains to be seen because the Federal Reserve is very institutionalized monetary policy making body. It's not only Kevin Warsh would have a say, but the board members would also have significant input. And currently, I think that the board has been quite divergent. It's not as much sort of consensus building as in the past. So I think it remains to be seen how much Warsh can really change the policy-making sort of regime at the Fed.
And the U.S. is now facing rising inflation and falling consumer sentiment. So what's your assessment of the health of the U.S. economy right now? How difficult is this environment for a new Federal Reserve chairman?
Right. So I think Kevin Warsh is having a quite difficult job in front of him for 5 different reasons. And one is, as you mentioned, the U.S. economy is struggling with sticky inflation. The CPI surged to 3.8% in April, and the wholesale price actually increased by 6%. So inflation has remained stubbornly high above the Fed's target for already over 5 years. So in other words, Kevin Warsh would have a difficult job in terms of how to rein in inflation. And that is, I think, in the midst of this kinds of geopolitical and oil shock. So that's the second factor I think would make his job difficult because, this energy crunch, the energy cost led inflation is very difficult to tackle with because it's very easy to, I think, generate stagflation, right? If you hike the interest rate too much, maybe you are able to reduce inflation a little bit, but you would really slack the economy. And then third problem, I think, is the federal government debt. In other words, that also creates certain political tension because for President Trump, he would want the Fed to lower the interest rate to stimulate the economy, and more importantly, to reduce the interest payments on those federal government debt. But at the same time, I think the market would want to have lower interest rates to stimulate growth, especially right now. This is the fifth factor, which is the consumer credit is pretty much strained. Many consumers are facing high inflation, high cost of living, stagnant wage growth. And so they would really want to have low interest rate to help with their finance. So I think all of this then create a very difficult situation that on the one hand, hiking interest rate to fight inflation would then further slow down the economy and create a lot more interest payments on federal debt and also strain the economy in terms of, especially for the lower and middle income class.
And the majority of Americans are concerned about the economy. Nearly 3/4 say incomes are not keeping up with inflation, driven in large part by escalating energy costs and high tariffs. And some analysts say if we look at consumers, it's being described as K-shaped market. So do you agree with it? Is that the K-shaped economy?
I believe so. I think it's quite clear that there is the K-shaped economy where the upward leg of the K represents the affluent, wealthy asset owners, where the downward leg represents the struggling, everyday average Americans. So I think for the upper, level class, the wealthy, they are enjoying asset inflation. The stock market remain resilient, largely due to AI related trade, and the home value have stayed elevated. All of this increase the wealth of the wealthy class, and they're also enjoying high yield income because the treasury yields now are, around the range of 4 to 5%. So these fixed income assets have also generated very lucrative profits for them. And finally, corporate profits has been really rising, especially in tech, in defense, in energy. So all of this help to provide a lot of wealth for the high income class. But in terms of lower and middle income class, the consumers are struggling with high prices for groceries, gas, insurance, utilities, and so on and so forth. And as you also mentioned, that the tariff is also another cost enhancing policy that really disadvantage lower and middle income families. And there's also, to cope with the high costs, consumers are resorting to credit cards and auto loans. And with the interest rate is now in multi-decade high, credit card debt has surged to record levels and create delinquency and for credit cards and auto loans. And this now is the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. And finally, I think, again, with the high mortgage loans, it has created an affordable housing crisis. Many of the lower income families are locked out of the housing market entirely. So I think that's clearly a K-shaped economy where the wealthy is doing very well, but then the middle and lower income class are really struggling.
And looking at the stock markets, this is a little bit confounding. The JP Morgan says the U.S. stock markets have shown surprisingly resilience in the wake of the war in the Middle East, and they recover from initial sell-offs and then they start trading at all-time highs. So what do you think about that? Do you expect this kind of trend will continue?
Well, so I think the optimistic sort of analysts would say the stock market or the financial market in general are able to see through the kinds of energy sort of crunch and the geopolitical risk. So they're able to see the AI is driving productivity growth and a lot of capital expenditures, and therefore it helped to continue to drive the stock market boom. But I think there are definitely risks there involved, especially when the market is so reliant on AI. So we know that now the big tech's AI infrastructure spending is projected to reach over $650 to $700 billion a year. And so it is this kind of large capex that is driving a lot of these stock market boom and also the kinds of investment boom. But let's not forget that there is a revenue gap because right now, I think the end user monetization is still very uneven and also opaque. I mean, chip makers are making multi-billion-dollar profits by selling the hardwares, but software companies are not able to really generate, massive revenues from AI. So there is a revenue gap and sort of cast a doubt on whether or not all these capex can really generate a healthy return to continue to support the kind of investments. And I also think that there is really the problem of, the too connected to fail kind of problem, because right now you see a lot of mega cap tech companies are investing $1 billion into AI startups. And then the startups would then immediately hand the cash back to the tech company's cloud division to rent their servers space. So this is really like, what happened in the 2000 dot-com bubbles when you have this kind of vendor financing shell game that is going on. And finally, I think another thing that concerns me is, it's actually really expensive to run those advanced AI models, especially those complex agentic networks. They're very expensive. But I think that companies like, software, Microsoft or Meta, I think their computing costs are really growing faster than their workplace productivity gains. So again, a lot of these investment in AI has questionable, revenue streams and productivity growth that would really justify it. So, I mean, there are arguments that today's situation is different because a lot of these capex is funded by cash flows, is by their own, revenues and capital. It's not the highly leveraged kind of spending like what we had in the past. But still, I think there are enough, these factors that create some of the concerns, whether or not the AI is creating sort of a bubble and how long this kind of bubble will last. So that's kind of your question, right? How long the stock market boom can last? I think it really depends on whether or not AI can really pan out to boost productivity and revenues to justify the high, capex spending.
That was Yan Liang, professor of economics with Willamette University. Coming up, Huawei reveals a chip breakthrough. This is World Today. Stay tuned.
Welcome. I am Chu Zhang, Deputy Director at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Fudan University. On the World Today program, we will dive beyond the headlines to uncover the stories, trends, and impacts that connect states across the globe. Join me on World Today.
Welcome back. Chinese tech giant Huawei has unveiled a new scaling law for advanced chip development, marking the first time a Chinese firm has proposed a new guiding principle for the semiconductor industry. Huawei says the new TAO scaling law will guide the future evolution of both semiconductors and electronic systems. It comes as Moore's Law, the long-standing industry principle that chip performance improves as more transistors are packed onto smaller chips, is nearing both physical and economic limits. The new framework will support Huawei's push to build a more self-reliant semiconductor ecosystem amid growing global tech competition. For more, my colleague Song Ruixin spoke with Dr. Liu Shaoshan, Director of Embodied Intelligence with the Shenzhen Institute of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics for Society.
Dr. Liu, many of us may not fully understand all the technical terminology around semiconductors and scaling laws, but in practical terms, what concrete improvements or real-world impact could this tall scaling law bring to the future products?
Well, it's quite interesting. So we have something called the Moore's Law, which is the gold standard for semiconductor. The Moore's Law says that the number of transistors on a chip would double every 18 to 24 months. So it focuses on the space utilization of a semiconductor chip. But then now, as technology advances, we have hit a physical wall. It's no longer possible, or it's very challenging to keep up with the Moore's Law. So the Tao's law is basically saying, even without keeping pace with Moore's law, we can still improve the performance of a modern chip by utilizing multi-level of optimization instead of just jamming more transistors on a fixed chip size. So basically, if we translate to layman terms, even without the most advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment, we can still do more advanced chips.
And building on that, how might everyday users actually experience these changes?
Well, everyday users would not feel anything. That's the interesting part. They can still get more advanced phones. The generations of new cell phones will come out, and generations of new cloud-based computing chips will come out as the usual pace that we have seen before. Because of this Tao's law that Huawei developed, they can integrate different levels of optimization to make up for the slowdown of technology.
So is that the way how the Tao scaling law work in simple terms?
Yes, I think so. It basically, I think Tao's law focuses on time domain, whereas Moore's law, the original law, focuses on space domain. So in semiconductor business, as you can jam more transistors into a fixed size of chips, you can deliver high performance. So you can reduce the time of computing. But then using Tao's law, it's saying that, I can use different levels of optimization onto the same chip. So the overall compute time remains the same as if we had Moore's law, so that the end user would not feel the difference. I think that's what it says.
Can we understand this as the fundamental idea behind it is kind of to limit the time of processing?
I would not call it a law yet, but it's a multi-level of optimization to go around the lack of technology advancement. For example, Moore's law has been around for almost 60 years, and it's proven to be valid for 60 years. That's why we call it a law. I think Tao's law, it's a good name, but it basically says that we can wrap around, or we can go around the technology wall or the technology slowdown that we have seen and still deliver the same performance to meet users' expectation.
But what specific circumstances or industry trends led to the proposal of this law?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think there are two problems that we hit in semiconductor business. The first problem is the physical wall, such that the scaling of Moore's law is projected to slow down because we have hit the limit of semiconductor. We are going into the sub-nanometer domain. So it's very hard to sustain the technology advancement. That's a physical limit. The second thing is geopolitical limit, that there are trade restrictions from the US on Huawei, so that, for example, ASML would not sell the latest EUV machines to Huawei. So that would slow down the technology advancement process within Huawei or in China in general. So we have to find a way around it. And the way around it is Tao's law, so that we can apply different levels of optimization onto the chip business.
Yet many experts now say the Moore's law is approaching both physical and economic limits. But you say there's a kind of physical and geopolitical limits. How should the public understand this turning point and its implications?
The public should not understand because they do not feel the implication. People would expect for example, when the US put a ban on the semiconductor equipment, they would expect a slowdown of Chinese chip business. They would expect that Chinese chips would not catch up with the technology advancement trend with the rest of the world or US in general. But then I think that's exactly the opposite, because of Tao's law, the general public would not feel anything. they will still feel that the chips are advancing. The next generation of Chinese phones are much better compared to the previous generation. So they don't feel anything on the surface. But underneath it, that's what it matters, that we have applied multi-level of optimization to make up for that ban. So I think that's the beauty of it.
Of course, proposing a new technological framework is one thing, but turning it into large-scale industrial reality is another. So from implementation to manufacturing and eventually commercial deployment, what major challenges do you foresee along the way? And which stage is likely to be the most difficult?
Well, I think because Huawei have some proven track record to support, evidence to support, and they have set a very aggressive goal to achieve 1.4 nanometer equivalent performance by the year of 2031. So it's about 5 years away that they will hit a very major target. In terms of barriers to overcome, I think there are a lot. Now we are not talking about optimizing one thing, which traditionally be the technology of chip manufacturing. You're talking about going around the technology wall with many layers of optimization, whether it's on the circuit design, whether it's on the system design, whether it's on for example, the memory design, and so on and so forth. So that demands multi-level of advancement together in order to hit the aggressive target. So it's a daunting challenge.
Do you think this technology altered the competitive dynamics of the global semiconductor industry, especially for late-moving players seeking to bypass traditional scaling path?
Yeah, I think so, because in this industry, people follow Moore's Law. That's the gold standard that people follow. So when people plan for next generation technology, they would make an assumption based on Moore's Law. So following that trend, when the US put a ban on chip manufacturing machines, they would expect to slow down the progress of Chinese chips. But then because of Tao's law, we apply the different levels of system optimization together. We kind of go around that assumption. So it's a game changer. If that stands, if this is successful, then people might not solely rely on Moore's Law for scaling in the future.
Then, if we looking ahead over the next 5 to 10 years, which sectors or applications are likely to benefit most rapidly from the Tao scaling law?
Well, I think everything, because now today AI is integrating into society quite fastly. Then AI depends on computing, whether it's computing on your cell phone or computing in the cloud. So the fundamental layer of society becomes computing. So this has tremendous impact to society instead of just impacting people's smartphones.
That was Dr. Liu Shaoshan with the Shenzhen Institute of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics for Society. That's all the time for this edition of World Today. I'm Do Hongyu in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.